road in Will Rogers' van, seeing every sight that we possibly can. White line that leads to historical thrills. 'Cause I'm cruising 66 and I'm road tripping with Will.
We road tripped all the way down to Miami, Oklahoma, where Will spoke at the Coleman Theater in 1931. Wait, hold up. Let's give you a little context first. 1931 was a big year for Will Rogers, biggest movie star, radio star, newspaper articles read by millions, entertaining all over the world. But in 1931, Will set off on another trip to drought-stricken Oklahoma, Texas, and Arkansas. He was simply there to raise funds and lift spirits. The tour consisted of 50 performances in 18 days. In Oklahoma alone, Will raised $103,000. In today's terms, almost $2 million. This tour was also the final time Oklahoma's favorite son entertained in his home state. On his way to visit the Coleman Theater in Miami, Oklahoma, February 7th, Will ran into a fog issue. Fog forced Will not to land in Miami, but where there was no fog, in Narcissa, population 137. Will waved down one William Bennett, a salesman, on his way to AFTA. Bennett, who was a Ford salesman, sped down the main street honking his horn and pulled right up to the Coleman Theater to let Will Rogers off. Will walked into the Coleman Theater, into the lobby, and said, "Let's start the show." Will stayed and spoke about 2 hours and even joked about hitchhiking all the way to the Coleman. He joked about Bennett being a Ford salesman as well.
"The man that brought me into town asked me if I ever drove a Ford. I told him yes, but not like this. It looked for a while like he wasn't only going to bring me to town in a Ford, but he was going to sell me one."
Will was also asked to take a picture with the mounted patrol in Miami that day. The group of young boys got to meet their hero, Will Rogers. Another thing happened that night that would inspire a young artist. A young Charles Banks Wilson met Will that evening backstage at the Coleman. He asked if he could sketch Will, and these are those sketches. Those sketches would go on to launch Charles Banks Wilson onto becoming one of the most well-known artists in Oklahoma. As Wilson would go on to paint for the Oklahoma Capitol Project, he's responsible for the 4 great Oklahomans. One of those, obviously, is Will Rogers. And of course, that inspiration, that chance meeting at the Coleman, would go on to inspire Wilson for the rest of his life. The Daily Oklahoman wrote, "The strain of his strenuous schedule is beginning to tell on Rogers." Well, Will didn't think of it that way. He said this was one of the happiest weeks of his life. Will left for Bartlesville around 12:30, just as the fog was beginning to lift.